as the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and thereafter sanctions imposed on Russia start to take their toll. Countries around the world will have to brace up for inflationary spikes, disruptions to global supplies, and worse still, the prospect of a global recession. In a report released on Tuesday, former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Muda Yusuf, warned that there will be significant macroeconomic outcomes for Nigeria. According to him, this includes a spike in the fiscal deficit, rising debt levels, higher debt service payments, money supply growth, exchange rate depreciation, and intense inflationary pressure. Yusuf pointed to Russia's position as the second largest producer of oil globally, noting that the conflict in the region would disrupt oil supplies, reduce output, and trigger higher prices. The ongoing tension in Eastern Europe with huge sanctions may also affect bilateral discussions, which have progressed significantly between Nigeria and Russia on the resuscitation of the Ajaokuta steel plant, he added. To tell us everything we need to know about the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war and what Nigeria should be doing to prevent another economic slump, we're now being joined by Muda Yusuf, former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and CEO of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises. Welcome to the show, Dr. Yusuf, and good morning.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Yes,
and your
morning.
team, good morning.
I already gave an introduction, which sounded like a summary of a pre-statement that you already issued. If you could just walk us through some of those issues about how the crisis in Ukraine can affect, one, the global economy, and then macroeconomics in Nigeria. What are your topmost concerns?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you know, both the domestic and the global economy are just trying to recover from the shocks of the pandemic. We had a serious economic crisis in 2020. We managed to, get to a recovery phase in 2021. And even as we speak, many economies have not fully recovered, including the Nigerian economy. Now we have this major shock, dislocation, and disruptions inflicted on both the global economy and the domestic economy by the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Of course, one of the biggest impacts is arising from the fact that Russia has a very strong dominance in the energy space, what you call the energy dominance of Russia. Russia is the largest exporter of natural gas in the world, and Russia also is the second largest producer of oil. And of course, you can imagine what this kind of crisis will cause in the energy space if you have a disruption. And of course, we already have a disruption in supplies. Unfortunately, we are paying a very, very big price, again, depending on how protracted this conflict is, for the way we have mismanaged our oil and gas sector, which is very, very unfortunate. Because at a time like this, we should also be benefiting from high oil price. Of course, it's not as if it's a good thing to be celebrating the misfortune of others. But naturally, for all oil-producing countries, once there's a spike in global oil price, you should feel the impact on your reserves, you should feel the impact on your currency. Unfortunately, that is not the case with our country. We are massively dependent on importation of petroleum products, and this is the channel through which this is going to hit us, perhaps the hardest. Of course, you have macroeconomic issues, which I will address. Now, the components of fuel that have been deregulated. First is diesel. Second is aviation fuel. And of course, you have kerosene and all of that. we are likely to see an increase in the cost of all of these things. And you know the implication of that. Of course, petrol, normally the price will have gone up, but it is the subsidy that will absorb that. That's a different story entirely because of the effect that will have on the finances of government and the capacity to fund it. We use diesel to power many of our plants because of the inadequate power supply. Many of the trucks that move critical goods, services, food products across the country are running on diesel. Already because of the geopolitical tension in that axis, we are seeing a spike in global oil price, including diesel. Diesel has been selling, at least for the past 1 or 2 weeks now, for over 400 per liter. And with this crisis, it may even go up higher. And the implication is that for all the factories and SMEs that are relying on diesel generator to be able to to power their operations, this will take a hit on their production costs. And of course, as much as they can, they will try to transfer that to the consumer. Don't forget, already we are grappling with very serious inflationary situation, erosion of purchasing power, which is massively affecting the living conditions of our people. Then you have, of course, the cost of transportation, food products, all of that. All these trucks are running on diesel. Not many of them are running on petrol. So with the expected spike in the cost of diesel, the cost of transportation will also go up. Again, ultimately, this will be transferred to the consumer and further fueling inflation. Of course, we already know what has been happening to aviation fuel and the implication for air flights. Right now, 1 hour flight is about 50,000 naira, one way. If this situation gets protracted, we are likely to see an even bigger pressure on the airlines, which may result in further hike in airfares. Then in the area of gas, Russia is the largest exporter of gas globally. And you know, these are global commodities. When there's a major shortfall, then it will affect, of course, every other part of the world. So the cost of gas is also likely to spike, not just in Europe, all over the world. I know we rely on gas to power. A lot of our power stations are relying on gas. A lot of our factories are also relying on gas. So there's a major inflationary implication arising from the hike or the increase in energy prices as a result of this conflict. Now, of course, on the fiscal side, because we are so heavily dependent on importation of petroleum products, the import bill for the importation of petroleum products, particularly petrol, is going to increase significantly. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on the finances of government. The NNPC will have to struggle to be able to meet the demand. Because initially, all the fuel scarcity thing started with methanol and all of that. But the story is changing. Because the disruption and these issues around Russia is also likely to further prolong the fuel scarcity that we're experiencing. First, from the point of view of the supply disruption. Second, from the point of view of the cost of importing these things. So the cost is going to be phenomenal, and NNPC is going to struggle a lot to be able to meet up with the supply. And because of the significant impact on relative prices, and when I say relative prices, I'm comparing our price of petrol in Nigeria with that of the neighboring countries. Now that oil has crossed the $100 per barrel mark, the differential in price, because we are still selling at a subsidized price of $165, the differential in price will widen significantly. So that means that the incentive to smuggle will now increase. So we are likely to see an even bigger numbers in terms of domestic consumption, in quotes, of petrol. Because a lot of smuggling will take place. Initially, before now, we were talking about maybe 60 million liters per day or so. Before we know it, this will be getting to almost 70 million liters or more. And that may, apart from creating problem of domestic scarcity, it will further put a lot of pressure on the finances of government. Not long ago, the NNPC was talking about needing 3 trillion naira for purposes of subsidy. That was when this crisis has not even reached its peak. We haven't had this onslaught by Russia at that time. Now that oil price has crossed the $100 per barrel mark, we are likely to see even an increase in that figure. We may be talking now maybe about 4 trillion. And where is the revenue to be able to support that? Before the supplementary budget, we were grappling with a projected deficit of about 6.8 trillion naira. Now the president transmitted a supplementary budget of 2.55 trillion, which is pushing the deficit almost close to 10 trillion. Now with the looming crisis and the likely effect that we may need to spend a lot more on subsidy, this deficit may go higher. And once you have an increase in deficit, that means there will be increase in borrowing. You have to borrow more domestically, globally, externally, and even resorting to the CBN to be able to support the finances of government. All of these things have very serious macroeconomic implications. They have serious implications for inflation. They have implications for money supply growth. They have implications for exchange rate depreciation. They have implications for the welfare of the people. Because if there is anything that hurts the ordinary people the most, it is inflation.
Indeed.
Because their nominal incomes are not growing, and the prices are increasing.
Indeed.
So that means the real income that they have, their purchasing power, is being massively eroded. That is why there is so much hue and cry across the country about the issue of poverty. So there's a whole
Doctor,
issue that we need to deal with.
Dr. Yusuf, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I need to come in here now. For a place where many of us cannot point to on a map, the repercussions are quite dire for economy. But I wanted you to talk about the effect of this war between Russia and Ukraine on another one of our staples, bread. Importation of wheat is also affected. Can you talk about that?
Yes, between Russia and Ukraine, they account for about 30% of world exports of wheat. Again, wheat is a global commodity. With this disruption, we are likely to see a spike in the cost of wheat. Of course, we may not be importing so much from, but again, because it is global, when there is a crisis of supply, global prices will spike. And wheat, of course, bread is a staple. You use wheat for the production of flour. You use flour for the production of bread. And bread is a staple food. It's what is used by the common people. Over the last 1 year, we have seen close to 50% increase in the cost of bread already. So if this crisis gets protracted, we are likely to see a spike in the cost of wheat, in the cost of flour, and ultimately in the price of bread, which is again a major issue as far as poverty is concerned. Then globally, before now, both Europe and America, UK, all of them have been complaining about high inflation. Now, because of the energy dominance of Russia, this disruption will even further exacerbate the inflationary situation in many of these advanced economies. So even for them, this may also be a dilemma of sorts. Because the more you sanction Russia and all these things are disrupted, it's going to lead to further inflationary pressures. In Europe and America, they were talking about an inflation rate that they have not witnessed in the last 30 to 40 years. And that is even talking about inflation rate at about 6 to 7%.
Okay, sir.
Here, we had an inflation rate of 15.6%. We were celebrating. When inflation hit 6%, in US. There was hue and cry. The same thing in Europe.
Okay, sir.
So it's a major issue that they're also grappling with globally in Europe and the rest of them.
Okay. All of these are headwinds. Headwinds will always come to every economy. But the question is, what should we be doing with all these headwinds? What are the solutions? What should the government do?
Well, the solution, of course, there are very little you can do because we are very vulnerable. Just as I said, we are paying a very huge price for the policy dysfunctionalities in the oil and gas sector. Now, we need fuel. We have to import the fuel. The government tried to push through some reforms through the Petroleum Industry Act. There's a lot of pushback, both by labor and a lot of vested interest, who are benefiting massively from the status quo. If it is still possible to push through these reforms, that could be a window, but that cannot be something that can happen immediately. So the government will have to make, and the citizens will have to make a lot more sacrifice. We have to put a lot more money into this so that the citizens will not suffer. We may have to switch our expenditure. Some of our capital expenditure may have to suffer for this, because it is not easy to combine this with the normal budgetary plans that we have. So there has to be trade-off in the basket of the expenditure that we have. And if we need to further a bit adjust the prices for these things to come down, we can also look at that option. But we have been discussing that option for ages. We have not been able to move forward. So those are the things. Of course, the NNPC has assured that it's going to step up the importation of more petroleum products. We hope that will ease. The situation will ease in a very short while. But I must say there is no quick fix to this situation because we are very, very vulnerable. Then, of course, we need to look at the way we borrow and all of that so that we don't further create more problems, inflationary problems in particular.
Okay, Dr.
Because
Yusuf.
inflation is causing a whole lot of problems. Yes.
Dr. Yusuf, this will look like a force majeure. I don't think it will be right to say, oh, Nigeria is so vulnerable. Yes, we may have our own issues, but you are familiar with that Yoruba saying that if heaven is going to fall, it won't fall on one person's head. So this situation that has developed is going to affect every community everywhere. Okay? But for how long do you think that this nightmare will last? Because we may think it will go on and on and on, and it may just be a limited, kind of stress. And do you think that if that does not happen, Nigeria will face the prospect of another economic recession? But I keep insisting, we won't be alone in that regard. So because it's not Nigeria-made, it's a global situation.
Doctor. We won't. Yes, I agree with you, Doctor. We won't be alone. But why I was emphasizing the point of vulnerability is because of the fact that this will hit countries to various degrees. Countries that are heavily dependent on importation of petroleum products are going to be hit much harder. And we unfortunately fall in that category. So that is my concern. Of course, our prayer is that this conflict will be short-lived. We pray that some reason will prevail. And in any case, the conflict is between two unequal powers. You cannot compare the might of Russia with that of Ukraine. So it's only a matter of time. But I know that with the torrent of sanctions, a lot of this effect will linger for some time. Because I know that the global economy, many countries around the world are not ready to forgive this onslaught that has taken place, by Russia on Ukraine. So most of those sanctions are likely to be with us for a long time. They also have their global effects generally, because when you have these kind of things, it has a way of dampening the prospects of growth for the growth of the economy globally. Investor sentiments will also be adversely affected. Global stock markets, quite a number of them have been taking a plunge. Investors' confidence is being, undermined or eroded as a result of this. So it depends on how protracted this is, but just as I said, these are unequal powers, and the way, and if the Ukraine does not get the kind of support it has been asking for, because unfortunately, all these issues of sanction cannot solve the immediate needs of Ukraine. What Ukraine needs is physical combat support on the ground. Not much of that is happening. What is happening are more around diplomatic issues, economic sanctions, and all of that. These are not immediate things that can solve the problem. Because in the meantime, this man is overrunning Ukraine and wreaking a lot of havoc on that country. So if the situation remains the way it is, if there is no physical intervention by NATO and its allies on the ground physically in Ukraine, then it's only a matter of time before Russia overrun Ukraine, and maybe after that, we may now begin to pick the bits and pieces and see how we go from there. But it will linger for some time. And of course, the global economy will adjust. But again, the dislocations, the disruptions, we have to live with it for some time. That is my view.
Right, okay. So is there any sort of silver lining anywhere in this whole rather grim outlook?
Well, the silver lining is that businesses that are in the oil and gas sector, I'm talking of private investors now in that space, this is good time for them. Because oil producing companies, oil service companies make a lot more money when oil price is high, especially if there is no major disruption to output. So we are likely to see a lot more positive impact in terms of returns on investment on companies that are in the upstream sector, oil and gas upstream sector of the Nigerian economy, the oil service companies. Of course, unfortunately, the downstream sector have been massively mismanaged because of policy and regulatory issues. So they are also casualties of the current development. For the upstream, we are likely to see an improvement in their returns on investment. So that is at the level of private investment.
Okay.
And it's going to happen like that, of course, with oil companies across the world.
Okay, great. So I want us to do sort of like scenario planning here. I want you to posit a worst-case scenario and, if possible, posit a remedy for that worst-case scenario. In the event that the worst-case scenario will probably be in the event that this Russian invasion continues till the end of the year, which is just a scenario. Can you posit a step-by-step solution or how we can hedge against such scenarios?
Well, if it remains protracted, first, we have no choice than to adjust the oil price. I'm talking of domestic pump price. Because it is just impossible for the government to continue to support the current price, which will continue to, the current level of subsidy, because it will continue to increase. So we may have to revisit the issue of this regulation of price in the oil and gas sector. Because if it continues, this is certainly cannot be sustainable. So we may have to revisit that discussion. that conversation. If you're able to do that, then we can have the market players help to adjust the situation in terms of supply. We may see a lot more private sector participation, vision of the supply. Because right now, the burden of supply of petroleum products is entirely on NNPC. At all. Because the policy regime has shut out the private sector. And the NNPC is already feeling the weight of this. Before we know it, remittance to FAC, Federation account, will be zero from NNPC. So we may have to revisit that. We may have to engage labor and all the critical stakeholders that, well, this is an emergency and this is what we have to do. I mean, go around the country. Look at how much people are buying fuel now. Even at the pump. The meter may be reading something else. They have their calculator that they use. These are some of the realities that are already hitting us. So the reform of the oil and gas sector is something I think, in worst case scenario, we may have to quickly revisit so that we can stabilize the market. Otherwise, we continue to have this kind of chaos around because you need fuel to power an economy. We cannot continue with this. So if that happens, I think that is what I think we need to do. Then, of course, we may have to revisit the structure of budget to properly identify, okay, what are the utmost priorities at a time like this? When it comes to an emergency situation, we look at it. What are the main priorities? What are the things that we need to step down? We may need to juggle a few things, see what we can drop, see what we can push forward. But we pray that this doesn't last for long, and we pray that we don't get to that worst case scenario.
Will we have to borrow more?
Of course, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Because, of course, even right now, just as I said, the deficit is already getting close to 10 trillion.
Okay,
with the additional supplementary budget.
Dr. Yusuf, you said that earlier.
The president is asking yes.
You said that earlier. Quickly. There's something I need you to clarify for us. Why is it that as the pump price, the spot price of fuel goes up, you know, we keep hearing from you, from others, that this is not a good thing for Nigeria? Mele Kyari was the first person to say so. The Minister of State for Petroleum also said the same thing. But at other times in this country, we used to celebrate. Each time the pump price of Brent crude, you know, the spot price of Brent crude went up, and we would jubilate and say, oh, Nigeria will make more money. Why is it that Nigeria is now saying, look, the best thing for Nigeria is for the spot price of crude to stay at $70 to $80? How, in the immediate, medium, long term, can we address that? Because I've also had people saying that analysis is wrong. That it's a good thing that the pump price, the spot price of crude is going up. Can you help us clarify whatever may be some confusion in this regard?
Well, there is no confusion. Because of policy and regulatory issues, we have put ourselves in a situation where we are one of the leading importers of petroleum products. Simple. We are not refining. So the benefit that we used to enjoy at the time of like the Gulf War, when we talk about Gulf War windfall and all of that, those benefits have practically disappeared because whatever you now make from the windfall is taken out again through the importation of petroleum products. Because as you are making more money, you are paying more for the importation of petroleum products. So what you get from the right hand, you lose from the left hand. It's like in and out. Almost 100%. So that is why there is nothing really to celebrate. Because ideally, if we are running this economy properly, if we are managing the oil and gas sector properly, when oil price increases, We should be celebrating a positive impact on our results. We should be celebrating a stronger naira, a better exchange rate. But as these things are flowing in, they are flowing out. That is the challenge. So unless we really deal with the reform issues, which is fundamental to all of this, there's no way we can benefit significantly, if at all. The only beneficiaries are the private investors in the oil and gas sector.
Dr. Yusuf, I'd just like your comment.
That is what it is.
And as we're wrapping up, I'd like your comment on that, the adulterated fuel saga of a whole 3 weeks ago, and yet we haven't regained our equilibrium. You can still see fuel queues and the traffic that they're causing. People have not been compensated. I'd like your comments on that and what needs to be done going forward.
Well, I think that was a failure. It was a failure of regulation. It was a quality assurance issue. And I think appropriate institutions of government should be held accountable for that. Because if you are bringing in products that is supposed to be given to dispensed to the public, somebody has a responsibility to ensure. It's a public interest issue. Somebody has a responsibility to ensure that these things are properly checked for quality assurance. So it was a failure of quality assurance. And the NNPC, I'm sure, is doing something about that. Unfortunately, the NNPC is the sole importer. Of course, they must have given the contract to a few people to bring it in. But the buck stopped on the table of NNPC. So it's a quality assurance thing. As for compensation, I mean, that can be worked out, at least to compensate those who suffered the damages to their vehicle and all of that. That is the normal thing to do. But the way things are going, it's as if this Ukraine crisis is now taking over from the issue of adulteration. That is why the thing appears to be lingering, because the whole flow has been disrupted. And just as we are struggling to sort out the issue of adulteration, we had this major issue of disruption arising from the Ukraine-Russian crisis. So that is what is happening.
Thank you so much for your insight and views.